Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Today we'll be covering digital media for year-end strategies, and I've got a great duo with me here to talk about, media strategy, but then also how that plugs into your general digital strategy for year-end. So just a reminder, we want your questions and comments throughout the webinar. So if you have a question you would like us to address or a comment on anything we're talking about, feel free and drop that into the question on your GoToWebinar panel. Like I said, I've got two speakers here with me today, Emily Zipko and Alexis Schenkel. Emily is Associate Director of Digital Strategy, and Alexis is our Digital Media Manager of Strategy at RKD Group. And they've both been at RKD for a while, working with some of our amazing clients, and have lots of excellent knowledge and information to share today.
Hi, everyone.
So before we get going, we're going to do a quick poll to see, what you guys think or how you typically time out your media promotion for year-end giving. And so I'm going to launch a poll for you guys real quick. And so take a second and let us know, do you begin promoting media in December, November, October, or even sooner? So what's your typical timing for this? And I'll give everyone a couple seconds to answer. Emily, Alexis, what do you think will be the most common answer?
I don't know, maybe even sooner, just because statistically we cover more months with that option.
Okay.
See if our audience is on top of it, but
yeah. I mean, even sooner covers what is that? 9 months out of the year.
Correct. So statistically, just thinking.
Statistically, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to close it out and share our results. So it looks like a majority of people start in November, about 48%, a third in October, 12% going for that, what you bet on, Emily. And then we've got a small smidgen of people who start in December, so they like to focus on that, last little chunk of time. So pretty interesting. I think that's good to know that for our audience. So knowing that, I'll pass it over to you, Emily, to start covering this.
So to set us up, I'll just talk a little bit about why digital, why invest in digital media for your year-end giving campaigns. So there's a lot of benefits to our digital channels, and a lot of these mirror over into the digital advertising channels as well. One of those benefits is the targeting capabilities. So with our targeting in online media campaigns, we can accomplish both acquisition and renewal goals at the same time using the same budgets, and getting to utilize both of those goals and play those off of each other, so that you can borrow learnings from each of those targets, both for new audiences and for your existing audiences. The other benefit of really anything online, but specifically when we're talking about media, is that we are targeting the individuals, not just a list, and we are reaching them wherever they are online. So it's really about finding the user and then following them wherever they go online. Digital media can also be very cost efficient compared to some of our other channels, some more traditional channels. There's not a lot of hard costs involved, really just the cost to place the media. And then lastly, and probably my favorite one, is just the ability to capitalize on urgency. So you can be very quick in changing your messaging. So especially at this time of year when we have things like the election, where we want to hold off on messaging until an exact day when something is over, or these single day giving campaigns, we can make a change, and that will be in effect across the board in all of our digital channels within minutes, really. And you don't have that same ability to capitalize on urgency in some of the more traditional or offline channels.
A little bit more nimble than some other channels.
Correct.
And another thing with media is also that we can capitalize on those specific giving days, right? So we have Giving Tuesday, where we know that it's a one-day only type campaign, so digital media is great for that. But while it's still a great way to reach that audience on that specific giving day or the last month of the year, especially within those last few days of the year when giving is really encouraged, it's not as simple as just turning on an ad and reaching your target audience and driving revenue from that one day. It takes a lot of planning and work to ensure that by the time the giving day rolls around, your audience is primed and actually ready to give. So really, in order to capitalize on that urgency, there has to be a plan in place. To see results in December, start your year-end efforts in October. So it's great that we saw users starting in November, but we really want to push that up to October while we can still capitalize on those prospective donors. And when we know that it's a little bit more cost efficient to be in landscape in October, so that by the time November and December roll around, our users are already engaged with your organization, and then we can really drive home that conversion ask at the end of December. So really, an ideal media program is going to be running full, like for the full year. But if you're limited in budget, again, starting in October is perfectly fine. And then if you do have an annual media budget, we suggest allocating at least 35% of your overall media spend to November and December. And then again, just utilizing this full funnel approach is really vital to the year-end success. Each layer of this funnel really works to maximize those conversions within those last few days, few weeks of December. So when we're looking at developing a plan, there are 5 critical parts that we're taking into consideration. So who are we really trying to reach? Are they prospective donors? Are they existing donors? Are you interested in targeting both? How long do we have to reach them? And then really develop those learnings about their online behavior. So we really want to start in October developing those learnings online and see how users that are interacting, where they're going across sites, how they're interacting with your ads, so that we can make those decisions by the time December rolls around and we know who's engaged. Also, what creative messaging is going to really resonate with your audience to reach your goals. And then where and how will we most efficiently and effectively reach your audience within that time frame? So what channels should we run in and what tactics should be utilized to reach those audiences that we just discussed?
I think something that was most interesting for me when we were talking about this topic and kind of pulling together content for this was pointing out that like creative is just like one of 5 parts for this, right? But it's probably something that gets the most attention and most focus from people because it's visual, it's pretty, it's representation of your brand, but it's just a small part of the overall strategy, right?
Right.
Yes.
Just like in direct mail letters, like it's in my experience that most organizations would like a prettier acquisition package. They would like to go more full color. But time and time again, when you test the messaging, simple works, and really where we're able to like pull and influence the results is in the lists and the targeting and the tactics. And it's the same way online. I think as people with less media experience, and myself included, like we see that front-facing creative and put a lot of emphasis on that, but our teams in the back end that are media experts like Alexis, like they really know how much the data and the targeting and all of that is just as critical of a part as what the user's seeing in the front end.
Right. And we have so many smart technologies now within media that it's really going to take the audience that's most likely to resonate with that messaging and serve them those ads and really find those users based off of predetermined conditions that we've set within the platforms. But it really works very smartly and it defines and finds those users for you. And the creative, again, is just one piece of all of the different parts that go into this media program. So before we get into the details of the plan, we first want to talk about the different audiences. So like Emily said, digital media provides a variety of different targeting capabilities. So starting off, we have geographic and demographic audiences. So we can take what we already know about your donor file. Are they within a certain DMA? Are they a certain age? What's your average age of your online donors? We can take those existing learnings and apply them on top of our other targeting efforts and layer that so that we can reach those users who are most similar to our existing donors. And we can also target users based off of their interest. So really, how users are spending their time online. Are they spending time interacting with other charities? Are they spending time donating to other hunger relief organizations? Or are they spending time researching how to adopt a dog? So we can really follow users based off of their interest in and out. And we really like to layer those so that we can reach as many users as possible with those creative messaging. We also have the capability to target what's called a lookalike audience. So lookalike audiences are great because you can take your donor file or your Facebook page and you can build a lookalike audience, and that is going to match users online that have the most similar online behavior as your existing either files or your fans. So it's really great because it kind of skips the whole, they might be interested, but based off of their online behavior, they look already very similar to your existing donors, which is a great tactic to be utilizing for year end. And then of course, we can target your donor file throughout media. So we can target that really around year round, but really focusing again on them throughout December. So if they gave one time throughout the year, we can target them. If we have a lapsed donor list, we can target them. Just really focusing on what we already know, who we already know is interested, and making sure that we're reaching those audiences with that messaging as well. So where are we going to reach these audiences? Through a variety of combined media channels, and the keyword there is combined. So we like to layer these so they all work together to drive that end goal. We can reach users on Facebook through paid search or your Google grant, using display tactics as users spend time online, following them on news sites or while they're shopping, and then also through connected TV and while users are watching TV, streaming services, and as well as video. So there's a variety of different places online where you can reach your users, whether they're existing or if they're a prospective donor. So how do all of these work together throughout the media funnel for year-end giving? So like, again, starting in October, we're really going to focus in on that interest-based targeting throughout Facebook, display, and if your budget allows, video and connected TV. We really want to take this time to prime the new audiences and increase that brand awareness for users who might not be familiar with your organization, who are just now kind of getting in that giving mindset, making sure that we're sharing the message and that your mission is heard. So really that creative messaging is focusing on sharing your mission and encouraging users to learn more about your cause, and then also driving users to your website. And then to keep prospective donors engaged throughout your end, we would recommend allocating budget really in October and November, and then start to scale back on that interest-based targeting and that budget specific to those audiences in December, so we can really focus more on conversion asks.
So if you were going to encourage any of the viewers who said they normally start in October, or I'm sorry, normally start in November, and we want to encourage them like to try starting their media campaigns in October instead, these are all super helpful tips to consider as like, okay, if you're going to stretch your budget in October, start doing some targeting. All things to consider on sort of priming your audience to think of you when it comes to year end.
Yes, so messaging that you can layer your interest targeting. So if you know someone has an interest in giving to food banks or animal welfares, just making sure that you're meeting those users where they're most present. So if they're on their Facebook feed and they see an ad or just an overall brand messaging type ad, that would be great, because then you can capture those users and then also re-engage them later down in the funnel, which we'll get to. But really overall brand messaging. And then if you want to layer in some think of us when you're giving this giving season, I think that'd be great as well.
Is it true that the CPMs, or like the cost to place when you're at prospecting, are typically cheaper because it's like a wider net and you're not going after such specific people or criteria that you know for sure is going to resonate? Although it's lower ROIs, but is that the usual mix? It's cheaper CPMs on the front end?
Yes, so at that prospecting level with those interest targeting and contextual targeting, it is a lot more cost efficient than targeting your donor file, than targeting even that lookalike audience, and especially within retargeting, because there's a broad range of where you can go on the interest. So, and users move in and out of interest pretty quickly. So you're reaching a wide variety of people. So it is definitely a little bit more cost efficient than targeting gets down at the lower pieces of that funnel.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting you mentioned that it's even cheaper just in October in general. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to try and start in October, then it's really not as costly as you would expect when you start in November.
Right. And this year we'll get to further down in the presentation, but we have a lot of different factors to layer into this year. So we don't know what the landscape, how competitive it's going to be yet. We are still trying to make sure that we're there before it gets extremely competitive at year end, and you want your organization to be present before all of the craziness and all of the other organizations are in the ad space as well. All right, so once users start engaging with your brand campaigns and those prospecting efforts, you can re-engage those users with a different call to action. I know that new pieces of creative isn't something that is always capable, but if you drive them to a different part on your landing page, just maybe the About Us page, or any kind of more informational site where they can either fill their emails in. Email acquisition is a great way to re-engage those users, as well as using Facebook boosted posts. So Facebook boosted posts are a great way to keep either your existing audience engaged or those prospective audiences who've engaged with your previous advertising efforts, and really just continue to familiarize them with your organization. There's a variety of different posts that you can do to keep these users engaged, whether that's asking them to like, comment, or share any kind of any of your posts or any information that they would like to know more about. It's just a really great space to keep users engaged. And then we can also take those users and retarget them later with those conversion asks. So it's kind of a win-win with Facebook boosted posts at the engagement level. But then also just making sure that targeting is set up correctly here at the engagement piece, because we can target users who engaged with people or engaged with the prospecting ad. So again, just moving them down and directing them to get familiarized with your brand before we're actually asking for that hard CTA.
Yeah, and as Alexis mentioned, sometimes the creative doesn't even have to be different at the engagement level than it is at the conversion level. It's just in the way that you're managing it. And so, you know, the budget that you're putting behind the engagement should be a little bit less than the budget that you're willing to put behind at the conversion funnel. It doesn't necessarily have to be a different call to action than to give, because that can kind of really change the campaign if we're trying to go for email acquisition. So that's not the goal here. It's just, how do we further identify and further qualify our audiences as we get down to the conversion level?
Right, and on the budget piece as well, this is something that you're going to want to be focusing on in October and November, so that by the time December rolls around, you already have identified those, you've re-engaged those audiences, and you know that they are most likely ready to donate. So shifting that budget more into conversion in December, but letting this do the work in November or October and November, so that by the time December rolls around, this audience is really ready to donate.
I thought that was a good point, Emily, where it's like changing creative does not signal a change in your funnel or like shifting to the next stage. It's really changing your audience, your budget, your tactics and stuff. That really is like the funnel step.
Right, letting people qualify themselves further down the funnel.
Yeah.
All right, and then so the conversion portion of the funnel is really designed to reach those audiences that have the known proclivity to go ahead and donate to your organization. So like we said, prospecting and engagement have been working this entire time to get users to this part of the funnel. It's really, those two pieces are really vital to how this conversion layer performs. And while we want to be driving donations through media efforts year round, you should be allocating most of your media budget to these efforts throughout November and December. So we just talked about scaling back on engagement, but also scaling a little bit back on prospecting efforts as well, although we would like to see them consistent so we can continue to grow the users that we're asking for the donations. So you'll want to target here really those existing donors and heavy up on retargeting users who have spent time on your site. They like your Facebook page, they engaged with a Facebook post, they are part of your lookalike audiences, really retargeting and those existing donors and building out lookalike, building out your CRM files and having those on hand so you can target them as well. So we can heavy up on those users that last month and those last especially few days of December when we know giving is a really prominent time. And within paid search, we would recommend increasing branded keywords, bids on branded keywords to capture that relevant traffic to your site, and just making sure that messaging for either your Google grant or your paid search campaigns really resonates and is encouraging your users to give. So if we need to do a ad copy swap out at year end, definitely keep that top of mind to as well push through the conversion campaign.
Okay, so good review of, you know, all the things to consider for each stage of the funnel. I think like the big question is like, okay, so we know people typically start in November. And I think we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but the big question is usually like, when is the best time to start your year-end digital media campaign?
Right, so as Alexis kind of laid out, as we get further to conversion, like further down the funnel, the smaller your budget is, you're going to want to focus on the smaller the funnel pieces. But ideally, if you're able to have a budget that you can sustain having media in market all year round, you're really going to be able to capitalize a lot more, especially on the prospecting and acquisition layers. And so actually identifying people, potential donors that aren't already in your CRM, and bringing new people onto the file, running year round is going to be the best way to do that, because it's really all based on algorithms and machine learning. And the more data that those machines can learn, the better they're going to get at bringing new people onto your file that are interested in your mission. However, it is totally okay if you need to condense your budget into that Q4 to start in October, like Alexis had laid out in her plan. If you don't have the budget even to start in October and need to scale it back to be starting in November, or really to even hone in on December, you're going to be focusing more on the conversion levels. You're not going to be able to take advantage enough of that machine learning at the prospecting levels to realistically bring in a lot of new people other than the ones that you've already identified and have fed into the machines yourselves from your CRM. So that's kind of how I would approach it, is the more limited your budget, you're going to need to be just focusing in on conversion towards the end of the year in December, but you know, back out accordingly when you have a little bit more leeway in your media budget. And 2020 is special. So we all know 2020 has been a crazy year, and a couple of different things at hand. So we're going to talk through a little bit about how those have affected us so far, and how we're kind of considering them as we are looking into Q4 planning, etc. So the first thing that we'll touch on is the election season. So obviously during an election, there's a lot of noise, a lot of competition, but we do not recommend scaling back. Even though it might be a little bit more expensive to compete at this time, our goal really is to remain consistent and have a consistent presence in the marketplace. The CPMs may increase, but it's not the time to stop fundraising. Especially in crazy times, people do want something that they can count on and believe in. So donations to nonprofits will continue even through all of the election noise for those who continue to ask their donors. One of the main things that we've been focusing on for the organizations that we work with through the election season is the creative piece and how we can differentiate ourselves in the creative that we're showing. So instead of mimicking any of the negativity from election campaign ads, really this is the time to put a positive message out there that reflects the good that your donors are doing, the good that your organization is doing, and maybe wait until right after the election to put those ads out there that maybe more demonstrate more of the darker parts of the need of your org, like, you know, keep some of those more negative tactics or the tactics that focus truly on the need in your organization until after we're past sort of the negativity of the election season. So that's been one main way that we're trying to steer clear of all of that noise in the nonprofit space.
Yes, and I think that is so prominent just on my personal Facebook feed is when I'm scrolling and it's just really negative. It's turned into a really negative space. So how does your organization stand out? And I think that is exactly how you do it. It's positive. You don't want to keep scrolling negative stuff and then just see a sad kid. You want to see a happy kid to like lift your spirits, and a happy dog, and just really highlight on all the great work that your organization's doing. So like Emily said, just keeping that in mind, and when just knowing your own personal experience within online platforms right now, what you would like to see, and just keeping that in mind as well.
Are there like rules or like guidelines, limitations and stuff like that that Facebook has set around ads in relation to political season and stuff?
So this has been an ongoing change, and I think it gets updated almost monthly right now, but back in 2017, after the 2016 election, Facebook made a variety of changes, and one of the biggest ones that has actually impacted nonprofits is the need for a issue ad disclaimer. So if you're scrolling Facebook and you see the paid for by blank organization, that's something that we've been dealing with recently, and all of our organizations luckily have gotten up to speed. And then actually back in June, there was another update to this policy, and we've actually suggested steering away from using that paid for social disclaimer. We work really closely with our Facebook rep to ensure really to help identify the difference between a political ad and what a nonprofit is trying to accomplish. A lot of the same words are being used across political ads like hunger or education, and so we're really working with Facebook to identify how do we define a nonprofit with your algorithm, because it's really the AI that's checking everything. So how do we define that, and then what steps can we take going forward for all of our organizations to ensure that by the time election season rolls around, we're not getting a ton of disapprovals, and ads aren't being flagged for the use of the word hunger. So it's been an ongoing conversation, and there was also another update earlier this month that Facebook is actually going to pause all political ads starting the week before the election. They are just really concerned about misinformation. So no users will be allowed to enter the ad space, or no ads will be able to be created and put into the ad space starting the week before the election. And it is unclear what's going to happen, if there's going to be any following, whether after the election that's going to lift, or if they're going to continue it after the election as well, just to help stop the spread of misinformation. But luckily, we've gotten all of our organizations at a point where we don't need that political ad. And again, just working with Facebook closely to make sure that we don't get to a point within the next month that we're having to utilize it. So if you have the capability to remove that, we are 100% going to recommend you not using that.
Alexis, the lifting all of the political ads the week before, that's just political ads, correct? It's not like just all no new ads.
Yes, so that only applies to the ads that have to use a disclaimer. So we are fine, and we'll be in the landscape, the ad space before that even happens, but just make sure that you keep that in mind when you're going into the week before the election, and you might get some competition and some disapprovals back from Facebook.
But do we also anticipate that will really help with CPMs and competition? I mean, we'll get a break from all of it a week earlier, really?
Yes. So hopefully that does help. It does help that we're not using the disclaimer anymore as well, because there's a lot of ad money being spent on political ads right now. So we're not having to compete with them for ad space, and our interests are just really different in the users that we're targeting. So CPMs have started to decrease now that we're not using them, but again, just keeping a really close eye on it as we move in, or as we continue to get closer to the election.
So lots of rules and stuff that if anyone is managing, their own Facebook ads, or is, kind of dabbling in it for the first time, lots of rules and guidelines to keep an eye on as you build your ad copy and stuff. A simple word where you're like, clearly this is not politically related, but a word could flag it just because of the automation that they've got set up to catch that kind of stuff.
Yes, and we're trying to tell them or work with them to identify those words, but they've never really been able to provide clarity on what exactly flags the AI when it's going through the approval process. So we're still working on it.
And then, of course, with 2020 came the COVID-19 pandemic. So kind of how this, we've had a couple of different webinars and special things published about COVID, so won't go too into detail here, but a little bit of the high level things that we're thinking about as we're approaching Q4 in the digital media space and what's happened this year with the pandemic. So for any organizations that do have like a real tie-in to your response and your mission based on the pandemic, we would say continue to stress that need. Obviously, food banks is the #1 vertical that we work with that has really had a tie-in. Their need has really been increased due to the pandemic and where the economy is. So hunger is a big issue, and so far early signs indicate that the COVID donors that we have acquired, through the first months of the pandemic, are acting. They're not your average disaster response donor. We've already seen a lot of them renewing. So for those organizations who are very close to the frontline response, who do have a very tied-in need based on results of the pandemic, we are planning to capitalize on those lists and warming them up slowly in media channels. And Alexis, you can tell us a little bit about what we've seen so far on retargeting some of those new COVID donors.
Yes, so like Emily said, we're now taking the list of users who gave for the first time at the beginning stages of the pandemic and starting to drive them to our ads to re-engage them, keep them familiarized with your organization, and keep you top of mind for giving season at the end of the year. So we don't have any conclusive results yet, but we're really excited to have, again, just more people that we can target. Really interested to see how they perform at year end. And they are a great target audience to have. So making sure that that list is being uploaded and utilized across all of your media targeting efforts.
And then for those organizations who really don't have a tie-in, who your mission has not been, so severely affected by anything that's happened with the pandemic and with COVID, we would just stay the course. If you don't have a great tie-in, it means you probably did not take a surplus of new donors in response to the pandemic. So you don't really have to make that decision of, do we try to target them? Are they worth it? You probably have very small quantities in that way. And I will say that for some of the organizations I work with that are a little bit more in the middle of the line, they've been affected in ways by COVID, but not 100% tied in. I'm starting to see, I think, a little fatigue in just the COVID messaging itself. And so, it's still work in progress, but for those whose mission does not tie into it, I think we're getting to the point where there's maybe not a need to bring it up so much anymore and kind of just proceed with normal year-end messaging. But it's all very day by day in what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and for anyone who is looking for some examples of like how you do remind your COVID donors of what they gave to, and you're tied in close to that mission. We had a webinar in April on this, and so it's on rkdgroup.com/webinars. You can view an old webinar or download the deck, and it's got some good examples of maintaining your COVID donors and how you can appeal to this unique audience. We've also got RKD recently conducted a study in coordination with the Nonprofit Alliance, where we studied donors and asked them, did you give during COVID, what their habits were and what they're expecting to do in year end. And that's almost ready to get released. We're excited to share that. And that's going to be another webinar with TNPA. So if you're interested in that study and the results from that, you can also register for that on our webinar page too.
And then lastly, to touch on is giving days. Now, giving days are happening every year, so it's not necessarily specific to 2020, but just where our giving days are falling in 2020 is definitely on our minds as we are planning for Q4. So this year, Giving Tuesday is in December. It's on December 1st. So that just means, because Giving Tuesday is always the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. It can fall in either November or December, but it just means that you want to make sure that you're allocating that majority of your budget to December and pulling some of that November budget over. And then right after Giving Tuesday, you'll want to shift your messaging on December 2nd to more of the holiday year-end giving campaigns. Then this year, Christmas is on a Friday, and really right after Christmas is when it's kind of open game for that last chance urgent year-end giving push as you head towards the 29th, 30th, and 31st, which are really critical giving days online at the end of the year. Typically, I know RKD, we try to avoid launching any media campaigns on a weekend. That's a little bit because of market response, but also because you have people out of the office if anything goes wrong, etc. I know this year when we're talking about this really critical time frame of year end and the first day that you can launch this messaging being on a Saturday, we will be launching through the weekends, slowly getting that kind of last chance urgency message in the market, but then we'll really be heavying up starting on Monday the 28th, but then especially the 29th, 30th, and 31st on those last days. So those are really where your proportion of your media budget is going to start increasing.
Yes, and like Emily said, Christmas is on a Friday, but what's going to be happening over the holiday weekend is going to look a lot different than, say, your 4th of July weekend, where users are usually probably out and celebrating. But this year, we're probably all going to be at home with our families, and by that time, maybe even annoyed with them. So really spending time online, sitting on the couch, scrolling, just thinking of how users are a little bit more at home. That's something that we've seen across the pandemic. It's an influx of ad inventory because there's so many more users online. So looking forward to December, we're hopeful that we see that trend continue on with users spending time at their home rather than outgoing, celebrating, skiing, whatever a traditional Christmas might look like. It might look different this year. So making sure that we're still in the ad space and we're there when users are online, but really shifting that budget and pacing in a way where we can drive home within those last few days of December and really encourage that urgency, that last chance, and that kind of messaging those last few days of the year.
Excellent. So very on par with 2020. Things are a little different this year when it comes to year end. And I think so. Some of our key takeaways to sort of wrap up the webinar is, you know, if you can, if your budget and you know, resources allow, start in October. Start out with that messaging and sort of priming your audience and getting your brand out there. Use a layered strategy to move donors down the funnel. And I think my key takeaway that I learned from this is like just changing out your creative does not create a layered strategy. It's really allowing users to move down the funnel, changing your tactics, changing your audiences so that you're hitting the right people where they are. And then adjust your approach to the world of 2020. So many unknowns, but I think we can all stay rooted in sort of the best practices of direct response fundraising, where it's even though COVID is happening and there's a lot going on in the world, your mission's still important. And there's a lot of things that we can consider to try and adjust for these differences, but best practices still apply here. So as I said earlier, kind of teased this, we have our donor sentiment survey that'll be presented via webinar with the Nonprofit Alliance on September 24th. It is hosted by TNPA, but you can find a link to that webinar on rkdgroup.com/webinars. And that's where we've got also some recordings of previous ones. You know, we've obviously been talking about COVID for a minute now, so there are a couple of resources out there for you when it comes to retaining COVID donors, dealing with donor engagement during COVID, where you're missing out on virtual events or you're missing out on in-person events and having to do virtual events. So be sure to check out some of our resources on there. But otherwise, thank you all for listening in today. Thank you, Emily and Alexis, for doing the webinar with us today. I really appreciate it. And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.